Every sports season has that one defining moment, the kind of game that suddenly brings every lingering concern, every growing frustration, and every hidden flaw into full view. The warnings from critics, the optimism from loyal fans, the tension that's been quietly building for weeks, it all collides at once, and in just 40 minutes plus whatever exhausting overtime follows, the entire story of a season can feel like it. It changes forever.
Clark backing up and dropping a three. Little rookie out of Australia. Here is Clark. Oh yeah! Here from Indianapolis, Caitlin Clark sends us to overtime because Sonia Citron.
The Indiana Fever's matchup against the Washington Mystics felt like one of those games that exposes everything at once. It delivered the kind of unforgettable superstar performance fans will talk about for years, while also shining a spotlight on major problems inside an organization still searching for answers. And if we're being completely honest about what unfolded, both realities were impossible to ignore. First, we have to start with Caitlin Clark, because anything else would completely undersell what she accomplished on that court. Clark finished with 32 points, 8 assists, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, and a block, while shooting 1-0 for 2-6 from the field. Some people will immediately focus on the shooting percentage, but numbers without context do not tell the real story. The deep range shooting that made Clark a phenomenon was fully alive again. The logo threes were dropping. The impossible passes were back. Every possession carried that feeling that something unbelievable could happen at any second. And when the fourth quarter arrived, Clark transformed into the exact superstar this league has been waiting for. The energy changed instantly. The excitement returned. You could feel the entire building reacting every time she touched the ball. Indiana entered the fourth quarter trailing by 9. The offense had completely stalled for long stretches. Washington controlled the momentum throughout the second and third quarters, and the Fever looked completely out of answers on both ends of the floor. Nothing the coaching staff tried seemed to slow the Mystics down or reignite Indiana's rhythm. Then Clark decided she was not letting the game slip away quietly. What followed was one of the most electric stretches of basketball the WNBA has seen in a long time. Clark exploded for roughly 18 points in the fourth quarter alone, drilling pull-up threes from distances most players would never even consider attempting. The logo shots returned, the confidence returned, the chaos she creates for defenses returned, and when she hit the shot that forced overtime, it felt like she had completely taken over the sport in real time. During that stretch, Clark was operating at full freedom, aggressive, fearless, creative, and impossible to contain. It was basketball entertainment at the absolute highest level. And somehow, despite all of that brilliance, Indiana still lost in overtime. That is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable for the Fever organization, because this defeat did not happen simply because Washington played better late. The roots of this collapse began much earlier, and the turning point came from inside Indiana itself. You have to rewind to the first quarter to fully understand it. Clark came out firing immediately. She knocked down back-to-back threes, created multiple assists, and finally had Indiana's offense flowing with real rhythm for the first time this season. The Fever quickly built a lead around 10 to 12 points, and it genuinely looked like they were on the verge of blowing the game open. At that exact moment, head coach Stephanie White pulled Clark out of the game. That substitution changed everything entirely, turning what looked like a comfortable Indiana lead into a one-possession battle. And the biggest problem was obvious. Clark's rhythm had been completely disrupted. Players like Caitlin Clark thrive on continuous involvement. Her game depends on reading defenses in real time, controlling tempo, staying connected to the flow of the offense, and building confidence possession after possession. Sitting for 4 minutes right when she was dominating completely killed that momentum. Washington did not take her out of rhythm, Indiana did. The effects showed up immediately in the second and third quarters. Clark struggled to regain her shooting touch. The offense looked disorganized again. The Fever lost their identity offensively, while the Mystics steadily took control of the game. That's why the fourth quarter matters so much. Because what happened late was not the system suddenly working perfectly, it was Caitlin Clark rising above the system entirely. She stopped waiting for structure to save the game and simply imposed her will through talent, confidence, and competitiveness. She created offense out of nothing. She rescued possessions that looked dead. She delivered shots only a handful of players on the planet can make. For a few incredible minutes, she dragged Indiana into overtime almost by herself. And in doing so, she reminded everyone exactly why the hype around her existed in the first place. But during the middle portions of the game, when Caitlin Clark was forced to operate inside a slower, more restricted structure, the offense looked completely different, and not in a good way. The explosiveness disappeared, the flow vanished, and Indiana's attack became far easier for Washington to contain. That brings the focus directly to Kelsey Mitchell, because any honest breakdown of this game has to include her performance as well. Mitchell finished with 24 points on 1-0 of 2-5 shooting. On paper, the scoring total may look solid, but the efficiency tells another story. It took a massive number of shot attempts to reach that total, and the bigger concern goes far beyond percentages alone. For the second straight game, Mitchell failed to record a single assist, not one. She also finished without a single rebound. In all the minutes she played as one of Indiana's primary offensive weapons, her impact was limited almost entirely to shot attempts, and even that became a problem in the most critical moments of the game. Overtime exposed it brutally. With Indiana fighting for control, Mitchell missed a completely uncontested layup at the rim. No heavy defensive pressure, no impossible angle, just a clean opportunity left unfinished. Moments later, she stepped to the free throw line with a chance to cut the deficit to one possession and missed both free throws. Both. In a game decided by the smallest margins imaginable, those misses became impossible to ignore. They directly changed the outcome. What makes the situation even more concerning is the contrast with the rest of the roster. Every other regular rotation player has found ways to create for teammates during these opening games. Monique Billings contributed assists. Sophie Cunningham moved the ball effectively. Maisha Hines-Allen handed out 5 assists in this matchup alone. Lexi Hull contributed as a facilitator. Aaliyah Boston created opportunities before leaving with injury. Kelsey Mitchell, meanwhile, has now played 2 straight games in a major offensive role without producing a single assist. Not one successful drive and kick, not one setup for an open cutter, not one moment where creating for a teammate became the better choice over forcing an individual shot. At some point, that stops looking like random statistical coincidence and starts revealing a larger issue in how the offense is functioning around her. Right now, Mitchell appears locked into a score-first mindset regardless of what the defense is giving her. The ball movement stalls, open teammates are overlooked, and possessions too often end with difficult individual attempts instead of smarter offensive decisions. For a player receiving this level of responsibility, usage, and financial investment from the organization, the lack of playmaking production cannot simply be brushed aside anymore. It is becoming a real concern that Indiana's front office and coaching staff will eventually have to address openly. Then there's the Aaliyah Boston situation, which may end up being the most damaging development of all. Boston suffered a lower leg injury during the game and never returned to the floor. That alone sent immediate concern through the Fever, especially considering she was already dealing with physical wear entering the season. Now the team could be facing an even more serious issue at the worst possible time. There is still uncertainty surrounding how long Boston could be sidelined, but the impact on Indiana's roster is already obvious. The Fever suddenly look dangerously thin in the front court, and what makes this even more frustrating is that many people saw this problem coming long before the season started. Questions about Indiana's roster construction, especially its lack of reliable front court depth, were raised repeatedly during the offseason. Those warnings were easy to dismiss when the roster was healthy. They are impossible to ignore now. Indiana spent the offseason loading up on guards, but the front court issues were never truly solved. From the beginning, concerns about the team's lack of reliable size behind Aaliyah Boston kept surfacing, and those concerns were repeatedly brushed aside by the organization. Now, with Boston potentially facing time away because of injury, those unanswered roster questions are becoming impossible to ignore. At this point, the Fever are leaning heavily on Monique Billings and Maisha Hines-Allen to handle major interior responsibilities. Both players compete hard and bring valuable energy, but neither fills the role of a true backup center capable of anchoring the paint defensively, protecting the rim consistently, or controlling the glass against bigger lineups. Washington exposed that weakness throughout this game. The Mystics rotated multiple physical frontcourt players and completely controlled the paint during the second and third quarters. Indiana struggled to match the size, strength, and rebounding presence Washington brought to the floor. Once the Fever lost control inside, the entire game started shifting away from them. That's what happens when a roster lacks dependable interior depth. Teams with legitimate size will attack the rim over and over again, dominate second chance opportunities, and wear smaller lineups down physically. Washington did exactly that, and this problem did not suddenly appear overnight. Long before free agency ended, many observers questioned whether Damiris Dantas was enough to stabilize the backup center position for a team hoping to compete seriously. Those concerns were dismissed at the time. Now, with Boston's health uncertain, the consequences of those roster decisions are becoming painfully clear. The front office heard the warnings. The organization chose to move forward anyway. Now, the reality of those choices is arriving in real time, but there is another part of this game that may have revealed even more than the loss itself. When overtime reached its defining moment, the possession that would likely determine whether Indiana won or lost, the ball was not in Caitlin Clark's hands. Think about that for a second. Clark had just delivered the most explosive stretch of basketball this franchise has seen all season. She personally dragged Indiana back into the game. She created the momentum. She hit the shots that forced overtime in the first place. For 9 straight minutes, she looked like the best player on the floor by a wide margin. And yet, when the game was hanging in the balance, the offense went away from her. There is no reasonable basketball argument that explains why Caitlin Clark should not be controlling the final possession of an overtime game. Not after the way she was playing. Not when she is clearly the most dangerous offensive weapon on the roster. Not when she had already proven Washington could not consistently stop her. That decision says something much bigger about the Fever right now. It raises real questions about trust, offensive philosophy, and the overall structure guiding this team. Fans noticed it immediately. Analysts noticed it immediately. And the frustration surrounding that choice is completely understandable. The loss itself is final. Nothing changes that. But the deeper issues behind the loss are what continue to matter moving forward. The first quarter substitution that completely killed Indiana's momentum. The disappearance of ball movement from a player receiving major offensive opportunities. A roster that entered the season dangerously thin in the front court. A game-deciding overtime possession that bypassed the hottest player on the court. Those are not isolated mistakes. Together, they form a pattern. And what makes this even more frustrating is that Caitlin Clark almost overcame all of it by herself. Her fourth quarter takeover was one of the most electrifying performances the WNBA has seen in recent years. The logo threes returned. The court vision was spectacular. The confidence, competitiveness, and shot-making brilliance that turned Clark into the biggest draw in women's basketball were fully unleashed. For a few minutes, she looked unstoppable. And somehow, even that was not enough. That is the part Indiana should find most alarming. Clark delivered the kind of superstar performance capable of rescuing a flawed team from collapse, yet the mistakes surrounding her still proved too large to overcome. The season is still young, and there is time for adjustments. Much will depend on Aaliyah Boston's health moving forward. Rotations can change, strategies can evolve, problems can still be corrected, but the clock is already ticking, because through these opening games, a very clear pattern has started to emerge. One that becomes more obvious with every loss, every questionable decision, and every missed opportunity. Everyone watching can see where this story is heading. The only thing left to find out is whether the people running the franchise see it too.